A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom.
Spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in four basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate one generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students, without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism.
Welcome to episode 16 of the Exogeometric Show. So we are continuing now with our discussion of the 5th of 14 of the techniques of mind control. The 5th technique is indoctrination. And in fairness, I do need to point out that I have been referring to it almost solely as education. Indoctrination clearly comes in many different forms, but for most Western societies, and certainly in the United States, it seems to me that education is really the primary form of indoctrination. 12 years and 12,000 hours of young lives. So I just wanted to point that out. So one of the books that's had a huge impact on me is John Taylor Gatto's Dumbing Us Down. And here you can see my, I guess there you can see my well-marked copy. What I wanted to do here is there are just some excellent components from this book. I think I've quoted maybe one section or one or two, but there are just so many throughout this, and they don't necessarily have to do with a particular topic that I'm discussing, but they're just incredible insights. So what I've decided to do is just kind of sprinkle these throughout this episode. In other words, I dropped the idea that I was an expert whose job it was to fill the little heads with my expertise, and began to explore how I could remove those obstacles that prevented the inherent genius of children from gathering itself. I no longer felt comfortable defining my work as bestowing wisdom on a struggling classroom audience. Although I continue to this day in those futile assays because of the nature of institutional teaching, wherever possible I have broken with teaching tradition and sent kids down their separate paths to their own private truths. This has been out there for a while, so you may be aware, but if you're not, there was a speech given by a high school valedictorian named Erica Goldson at her graduation ceremony in 2010. It's beyond rich, and coming from someone of her age, it actually gives me some hope. In any case, I pulled together what I think are the best parts of her speech, so here we go.
This is the dilemma that I've faced within the American public education system. We are so focused on a goal, whether it be passing a test or graduating as first in the class. However, in this way, we do not really learn at our fullest. I am graduating. I should look at this as a positive experience, especially being at the top of my class. However, in retrospect, I cannot say that I'm any more intelligent than my peers. I can attest that I am only the best at doing what I'm told. Here I stand, and I'm supposed to be proud that I have completed this period of indoctrination. I have successfully shown that I was the best slave. When I leave educational institutionalism, will I be successful or forever lost? To illustrate this idea, doesn't it perturb you to learn about the idea of critical thinking? Is there really such a thing as uncritically thinking? To think is to process information in order to form an opinion. But if we are not critical when processing this information, are we really thinking? Or are we mindlessly accepting other opinions as truth? I am now enlightened, but my mind still feels disabled. I must retrain myself and constantly remember how insane this ostensibly sane place really is. We have no choices in life when money is our motivational force. Our motivational force ought to be passion, but this is lost from the moment we step into a system that trains us rather than inspires us. We are more than robotic bookshelves, conditioned to blurt out facts we were taught in school. We are not here to get a degree, to then get a job, so we can consume industry-approved placation after placation. There is more, and more still. The saddest part is that the majority of students don't have the opportunity to reflect as I did. The majority of students are put through the same brainwashing techniques in order to create a complacent labor force working in the interests of large corporations and secretive government. And worst of all, they are completely unaware of it.
No matter how good the individuals who manage an institution are, institutions lack a conscience because they measure by accounting methods. Institutions are not the sum total of their personnel or even of their leadership, but are independent of both and will exist after management has been completely replaced. The deepest purpose of these gigantic networks are to regulate and to make uniform. Since the logic of family and community is to give scope to variety around a central theme, whenever institutions intervene significantly in personal affairs, they cause much damage. By redirecting focus of our lives from families and communities to institutions and networks, we, in effect, anoint a machine our king. So something I'll always rail about is the metamorphosis of education into an implement for commerce. If we look at the interactions we've all had with students or their families, the schooling process is very clearly focused on the selection of and preparation for an occupation, employment, a job. Maybe this is another example of obfuscation. Is it the obfuscation of education with workforce planning? And sure, there might be some clusters of fancy philosophy talk at one of them uppity liberal colleges, but those are a rounding error. The action is in marketable job seekers. And here's what Elwood Cubberley, the founder and first dean of Stanford University's education department, said about U.S. schools. Our schools are, in a sense, factories in which the raw products, children, are to be shaped and fashioned into products to meet the various demands of life. The specifications for manufacturing come from the demands of 20th century civilization, and it is the business of the school to build its pupils according to the specifications laid down. Ultimately, how we think about social problems depends on our philosophy of human nature, what we think people are, what we think they are capable of, what the purposes of human existence may be, if any. If people are machines, then school can only be a way to make these machines more reliable. The logic of machines dictates that parts be uniform and interchangeable, all operations time-constrained, predictable, economical. Does this sound to you like the schools you attended, that your children attend? Okay, now to the final item today, and that is external nationalist influences on our schools. There is no shortage of indicators pointing to the presence and influence of socialist and communist agendas in the U.S. education system. We heard earlier from Norman Dodd, quoting the president of the Ford Foundation as saying that instructions came directly from the White House to use that foundation's grant-making power to alter life in the U.S. such that it can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. Now, most people can't hold attention long enough to even give that allegation much thought. Are those the ravings of a whistleblower contemplating the end of his life? Or if he's telling the truth, what does that truth mean? Well, I think someone who can help us with that is a woman named Charlotte Iserbyt, who served as a senior policy advisor of the Office of Educational Research and Improvement That's the section of the U.S. Department of Education, and she did that during the 1980s in the Reagan administration. So she became a whistleblower, and I found this article that she wrote, "Soviets in the Classroom, America's Latest Educational Fad." And it revealed a really shocking level of collaboration and agreements entered into between the U.S. and the Soviet Union in the 1980s regarding education. Wait, really? The Soviet Union and the United States? Is that the same Soviet Union we were told we were sworn enemies of? And maybe you remember. The Cold War, all that stuff? No?
If you know the history, well, we've all said this, that's why they don't teach history. I mean, if the American people knew the history behind the deliberate dumbing down of America and the destruction of their children's morals and values, they wouldn't say that, "Oh, Charlotte, you're a conspiracy person." Well, it is really quite an incredible conspiracy, I believe, that they managed to pull it off. But this one piece of paper, it had 3 columns. And one said input. And then it had the middle column was curriculum. And then the third column was output. So they take the students, the poor teachers who've been suffering for many, many years with all this in-service training, trying to, absolutely destroy their minds and their values, and the community. And you give them the curriculum, so-called, the resources, and then they come out in the third column. Each one of them says desired characteristics. The goal of those in power, I always call them the people on the 135th floor of Rockefeller Center. What do they talk about when they meet once a month? They say, "Oh, well, they haven't yet figured it out." Figured what out? They haven't yet figured it out that the left and the right at the top are the same. The national assessment, ever since 1970. That's the Carnegie Corporation, which in 1934 said in the little blue book that we have, said we'll use the schools to change America to a planned economy. And so that's exactly what, if you follow Carnegie all the way through with all of its funding of the Education Commission of the States, the National Assessment, the National Governors Association, the School to Work agenda, the agreements with the Soviet Union to develop computer courseware in critical thinking for early elementary school children, Carnegie. These decisions were made in the late 1800s. The method was brought over from Germany, from Leipzig, in the late 1800s by G. Stanley Hall, the Skinner Pavlovian method. This is certainly in education. The rest of the world does not know that the United States basically is responsible for the dumbing down of the whole world. I saw all the grants and contracts in my office in the Department of Ed, going all over the world to implement OBE, outcomes-based ed. Wim Spady ended up in South Africa. John Goodlad was in Thailand in the 60s. Trying to get the Thais to give up their classical education. So the United States has been deeply involved, and there's that one quote from Thomas Stick that I mentioned right in the beginning that is shocking. That it's more important, this is one of the top people at outcomes-based ed, it's more important to end discrimination and change values than to teach reading. That is when I saw that, we've got some bad quotes, but that's a very bad one. And, I always think C.S. Lewis's work too, when training beats education, civilization dies.
So back to my snide remarks about the irony of it now being proven that governmental and non-governmental organizations were sharing knowledge and entering into dubious agreements with the same country that we were told should be enemy number 1. Anybody else think that doesn't sound right? Now be careful. You might be doing your own thinking. Institutions, say their political philosophers, are better at creating marching orders for the human race than families are. Therefore, they should no longer be expected to follow, but should lead. Institutional leaders have come to regard themselves as great synthetic fathers to millions of synthetic children. This theory sees us bound together in some abstract family relationship in which the state is the true mother and father. Hence, it insists on our first and best loyalty. So we've covered quite a bit of ground today, and I'll leave you with this from H.L. Mencken, American satirist, cultural critic, and scholar of American English. The aim of public education is not to spread enlightenment at all. It is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same safe level, to breed a standard citizenry, to put down dissent and originality. Okay, that's going to wrap this one up. Thanks for joining me for this continuation of our discussion of indoctrination, which is the 5th technique of mind control. We've got 14 in total. I hope you'll join me next time. We're going to be talking about controlled opposition, which is something I'm looking forward to getting into. So, thanks. Appreciate you joining me. And always, do your own thinking. Until then, be well.